Welcome back to another episode of the Local Swing Podcast, where we interview local entrepreneurs, small business owners. Today we have New Scotland Spirits and the Sheriff of Lark Street, veteran Jesse Summer.
Yes, you do.
Thanks for swinging by.
Absolutely, Ryan.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
So give us a little intro about yourself. Where are you from?
I'm from New Scotland, and that's where the name New Scotland Spirits derives.
Yep.
It's for people who are in the Capital District, you might know it more as Voorheesville. And that's because, like, the postal district is Voorheesville. We have a Voorheesville post office. And so anyone who's in that postal circulation, you know, that whatever that district is, has on their envelope the name Voorheesville. Mm-hmm. But in fact, Voorheesville is this tiny little village in the town of New Scotland of only about 2,000 people. Okay. New Scotland proper has got 10,000 people, but it's spread out in a pretty substantially sized town. So where I grew up in the boonies on Clip Road, you know, it was me and the next closest neighbors were like half a mile down the road.
Okay. So did you go to Voorheesville?
You better believe it.
You're a blackbird.
12. I'm a blackbird.
All right. Okay.
I'm a bird of color now, under, you know, the way the terminology goes these days.
Good point. All right. So thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you.
Go through that. You're a very decorated military man, so
I am decorated, but you know, the end of the day, man, like, you know, a lot of those are they're the frills. When you get an award in the military, it's really just a demonstration that you did your job, right? Mm-hmm. The expectation is that, you know, you when you raise your hand, you join the Army, they're going to put you in different environments where you learn some new skills, learn some new talents. And the job is, in theory, to defend America.
Yep.
And that is what I did. If you can call it defending America, sometimes I question whether or not all of the different missions on which I was placed had a lot to do with defending America. You know, in retrospect, after 20 years of what seems like an unsuccessful presence in Afghanistan, I have almost kind of a certain ambivalence about it, which is why after joining the Army in 2012, I was psyched when Donald Trump in the first administration essentially said, we're getting out of Afghanistan, and put a stop to what basically was a Defense Department unable institutionally to extricate itself from the other side of the world. And then the subsequent administration, President Biden, was able to pull us out. By that point in 2022, that's when my service came to an end. So I did 10 years, first with the 82nd Airborne Division, and then I deployed to Iraq with 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain Division. Then I was with 7th Special Forces Group at Task Force 52 in Afghanistan, and then my terminal assignment was 18th Airborne Corps back at what is now, again, Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Right. And you know, it was a great time. I was a jump master, master parachutist, and it's almost weird. It feels like a dream looking back on that decade.
Yeah, you got out a lot more recent than I had thought.
Yeah, man. I joined late.
Okay.
So I was 29, on the cusp of 30.
Right.
I spent my 30s in the military, and you know, there's pros and cons to that. The pro is that my mind was much more adaptable. In other words, I had a little bit more life perspective to help me, you know, kind of enjoy the satire, the inadvertent satire of the Army, and get into it, you know, and really tackle all of the different challenges that I could. Yeah. You know, air assault, airborne school, jump master school, all those things.
Yeah.
I will also say that by the time I was at the end of my 30s, you know, when I would be on airborne operations and you'd hit the ground, you weren't popping up nearly as fast as these friggin' 19-year-olds who, you know, they can do that all day long and they're still running around. I'd feel it 3 days later, you know?
Yeah. Not that it's even close to, but it's a little bit of a comparison. I went to the Fire Academy out in Utica. It's kind of a paramilitary style. And I went when I was 26. And I feel like there were some things that I kind of like stressed out about back then, probably because of the lack of life experience at that point. Whereas like if you went knowing what you know now, it might have been an easier mental process.
I mean, even now, right? I've only been out 3 years, but suddenly even the things that seemed so important then, the pomp and circumstance, I wish I'd had this extra 3 years of just overall life perspective to inform how I engaged, some elements of my military career.
Sure. So what do you think being in the military taught you most about any of your endeavors now?
Well, I mean, remember, I wouldn't say necessarily the military taught me the value of a command hierarchy, right? The architecture of expressing ideas, but it allowed me to put it into practice. It allowed me to see it in practical application. The way the Army moves people is unparalleled. One of the things that you have to understand is that, everyone has different perspectives on how to do things.
Yeah.
What the military does is say, we're not even necessarily going to get you the best idea, but we're going to get the school of fish to be turning the same direction at the same time. And there are pros and cons to that, right? Sometimes that school of fish is going to turn right into the mouth of a shark.
Yep.
And there are different moments in our military history where we've done that. And once that ship has turned, or that school of fish has turned, whatever your analogy is, it becomes very difficult to turn it again.
Okay.
On the other hand, when you need to have a shared purpose, a sense of mission that can be easily communicated to everybody, the way the military breaks you down into the lowest common denominator and then builds you back up as a cohesive unit is unbelievable.
Yeah.
It is a remarkably successful cult. And the thing that you learn is that there are efficiencies to the way you execute a mission.
Yep.
There may be some inefficiencies to the mission, and so what you hope is that leadership does the right thing, right? That you have people who are going to ascend to the echelons of influence and make the right decisions. And in business, it's the exact same thing. Businesses can lose their way if you don't have the right leaders. On the other hand, if you do have someone who's got a vision and can transmit that to people and get everyone operating in the same sight picture, the same sheet of music, same page, whatever the cliche is, you can have a very successful approach to whatever that shared mission is.
Sure. So you mentioned communication.
Yep.
I feel like that's a common denominator across all aspects of life, and some of the other entrepreneurs that I have interviewed stress that. So parallels of communication within the military and then within business.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately what you're trying to do, a great example is something called the op order, right? The operation order. What the military does is they even have a basic pedagogy that explains how you're going to talk. Here's all of the different components of the operation order. You got to hit these points.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And the reason you hit these points and the reason you make it very clear to understand is because you want structure. One of the things about communication is that if it's not structured, it becomes difficult not just to express yourself, but difficult for people to understand what it is they're hearing.
Right.
It's the same thing in business. And that's what they talk about in like marketing, for example. You have to have a very tight message template.
Yeah.
And I would say that certainly the military helped refine my sense of like what I need to do to be really tight, really expressive, really simple, so that I can convey a message not just to like the customer base that I want to buy my products,
right,
but also to the team that's pushing it.
Yeah.
If I want to plug somebody in to be able to sell our products, I got to be able to express to them what the product is and how to sell it in a 4-sentence environment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So let's do that. What is your product and how do you sell it?
I distill spirits from grain grown in the state of New York, and primarily the Capital District. And when I say spirits, what we're talking about is an alcohol that begins as a fermented mash, and then by adding heat, you distill out the alcohol, which then goes into the still, cools, and that vapor condenses back into a liquid. That's liquor. And then when you throw that into a barrel, assuming that it is a cereal grain, right? Oat, although that's pretty uncommon. Barley, wheat, rye, corn, principally those 4 cereal grains, are what make your whiskey. You age it in a new charred oak barrel, and you got a rye whiskey if it's 51% or more rye, a wheat whiskey 51% or more wheat, a bourbon 51% or more bourbon, all aged in new charred oak barrels.
Yeah.
That's what we do. And the cool thing about the company I've erected is that, you know, you're distilling a farm product. It's an agricultural product, and you're drinking what you know a farmer was responsible for planting, then harvesting, then given to, you know, the distilling operation to turn it into the elixir that bring people together.
Sure. So how did you know that this was something that you wanted to build out? Like, were you thinking about this when you were active military, about what you were going to do when you got out?
When I was 5 years into my 10-year Army career, there were a couple things that happened. It was a kind of a circumstance of fate, but also, you know, had to do with what has likely been a lifelong mission of mine, which is to preserve the agrarian traditions of my hometown. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a very rural element of Albany County. Yeah. And I wanted to stay that way. Yeah. While I was overseas, there was an effort again to develop this property that's very sacred to New Scots, right? People who hail from New Scotland. And I was like, you know, we can't every few years constantly be turning to our zoning regulations to try to drive out the big developers that are trying to put a parking lot over all our fields and forests. Mm-hmm. So what I did is I went to some of the farmers in town and I said, look, we got to create an agritourism base in New Scotland. We got to use capitalism against itself. And I started sourcing grain from the farms in New Scotland and driving another revenue stream to these farmers so that our fields would remain available for farming. And sure enough, what you're looking at with our vodka, our gin, our whiskey, this is the end result of that effort. 5 years later, when I started harvesting our spirits after I got out of the military, you know, what you're looking at is a time capsule of an agricultural product now that it's been properly aged in a charred oak barrel, that people can enjoy, but with the understanding that, like, this is a farm product. And as a last little note, just because here's a fusion of the Army with, you know, alcohol. It's a national security element, right? Farms, family farms, small sustainable farms, if you lose your ability to grow your own food supply, you become at the mercy of whatever entity is going to provide you with sustenance. So from my perspective, it's like the thing that's great about what our company does is it creates an incentive for people to maintain farmland, which is, at the end of the day, the most crucial resource you can possibly have if that fucking grid goes down.
Sure. So, yeah, there's always a greater thing that you're kind of thinking about with that.
Yep.
That's cool. So, you market yourself on social media.
Yes, I do.
And from looking at your social media, I would say you're very comfortable with doing so on the camera. You have the Sheriff of Lark Street Instagram page. Tell us how that came about and how you juggle both Sheriff and New Scotland Spirits.
So here's the thing. When you're marketing a product, the product isn't... You have to understand what the product you're marketing actually is. If I told you that I make a whiskey, who gives a fuck, right? Anyone can make a spirit.
Yeah.
What we did is we created a show of sorts around that product with character development of the people that were working on this shared vision.
Yeah.
And one of those characters, the kind of the alter ego I stepped into, was the so-called Sheriff of Lark Street. Lark Street in the Capital District is like a historic... it's a wild street. I mean, there's a lot of commerce on it. There's a lot of history. We put the tasting room, the retail component of our business, on Lark Street, which is like, I mean, the seminal street in Albany County and the city of Albany, and thereby, you know, the Capital District. And Lark Street is having, it's having its moment right now. There are ebbs and flows to the culture of Lark Street, but right now we are in we're on a pretty substantial downturn. There's a lot of, a lot of suffering on that street. People who don't have housing, a lot of drug usage, prostitution, a lot of vandalism. There's at this point a variety of societal ills that are conspiring to make Lark Street very different than the place that I remember from 20 years ago when I used to party on Lark Street, coming from the boonies out in New Scotland.
Yeah.
So I started, the character that I played was, every street needs a hero. Mm-hmm. Lark Street has one in the form of the Sheriff of Lark Street, who single-handedly, vigilante style, like a modern, real-life superhero, is coming to the rescue of Lark Street. And that's how I kind of juggle these two twin components of what is the larger company branding. We've got New Scotland Spirits, which creates this product with all these different characters who have their own little storylines, and that's how we kind of make our company relatable to people. And then derivative of that is my particular storyline as the man responsible for arresting the chaos that's descending on Lark Street.
It's got a WWF vibe to it.
Love that you said that.
In my opinion, like when I watch some of the stuff, I'm like, this is a guy that's talking like you're doing an Instagram reel or something for the Sheriff of Lark Street, and to me it was like one of those pre-match, you explaining like who you are and why you're going to take down your opponent in the ring.
I find there's an interesting gender gap on some level in the way people engage, specifically, for example, the Sheriff of Lark Street social media.
Yeah.
If you had access in any way, shape, or form to old school wrestling, I'm talking late 90s, early 2000s, you get it. People can recognize it right off the jump. And I love that you said that because, who's the originator of this approach to marketing? I would say it's Vince McMahon. And I think it's important to notice that the gentleman who now occupies the White House, in some respects, borrowed that playbook, even intersecting with the WWF then E as his own character, a play himself character within the realm of the character development of the World Wrestling Federation, right? The reason why I say there's a bit of a gender gap is that dudes get it. I find that what's somewhat funny is that women who may not culturally have had as much exposure to WWE or WWF back in the day, their immediate instinct, and you can see it in the comments, is to take a lot of what I do at face value.
This episode of the Local Swing Podcast is brought to you by Better Buddy Sports, which is a fun and social way to partner up, challenge others, and win prizes from local businesses. So if you're a competitive amateur golfer looking to put your skills to the test, go check it out. Better Buddy Sports on Instagram, betterbuddysports.com, and let's get after it.
Underlying commentary is the point, but a lot of, at this point in our evolution as a species, truth has been completely obliterated by partisanship.
Sure.
And the only thing, in my view, that unites everybody is an ability to understand comedy and social critique through the wink and the nudge and, the fingers crossed. There's a satirical component to it that I think is very powerful. And so I lean into that satire both to market my product, but also to advance a kind of overarching political philosophy when so much of our communication infrastructure is designed to pit us against one another.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you're going to fight with somebody, let's get some cameras to watch it, and let's do it in a ring where even the punches are choreographed a little bit.
Sure. I would say, like from what you just said and looking at your social media, you kind of use that little satirical element, and it to give you some confidence. Is that true?
Sure, because there's a disassociative element to it, right? Like, it's not me. If you look at Reddit, it is littered with people who are just dogging me. But they don't know me. Right? They're dogging this character that I've given them expressly to dog.
Yeah.
And so I think that one step of remove is probably important. You know, what the internet is known for is, in the aggregate, bringing out everybody's worst selves, right? But I find that, like, our worst selves, if you're able to have a certain sense of humor about it, they're actually pretty great. I'm gonna give you an example.
All right.
Son, I was a Karen before that word was even invented.
Okay.
There are times when I'll be out and I'll just fucking lose my shit because I woke up on the wrong side of the bed.
Yep.
And when I see people's worst behavior captured on video, you can look at that person and you can judge it, or you can focus on that voice in the back of your head that's like, there but for the grace of God go I, because I've been that person.
Right.
And so I actually kind of like, on the internet, you get to see what is clearly our worst selves, but I'm always looking at it being like, you know what? I make some of my best friends by fighting with them first.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of like, I don't have a lot of use for people who like me. I already like myself enough.
Got ya.
What I want to do is, like, engage with people who don't like me. That's the interesting part.
Right.
That's the part of someone who's seeing something I may not be fully aware of.
Yeah.
Or I could be completely oblivious to it. And, in that exchange of ideas, that's where you get a discussion going.
Yeah.
There's really, we got enough echo chamber here. Our fucking algorithms put us all on the same page as it is.
Right.
Like, it's time to get out and, like, literally start breaking bread with people who hate us.
So that, I saw your press conference on Lark Street.
So we called a press conference just under the mantle of the Sheriff of Lark Street, and sure enough, the local media apparatus showed up in droves to capture it because they're a business model too. They're looking for clicks just like anybody.
Right.
So they see, oh, there's a spectacle. They show up. It could not have worked out more perfectly. We, did the press conference where I'm, ranting and raving about the criminality and the social ills on Lark Street, and the press showed up. Created its own little echo chamber.
Like, watching it at first, I honestly was wondering if there was a satire element to it, just because of some of the people that stepped up also, and I couldn't tell if things were scripted until I watched it further into it.
The way I would look at it is, no, it's not scripted. But when you approach something satirically, you're creating the platform that everyone accesses, right? You've established the stage.
Yeah.
So, for example, you'll see there's that black dude who walks up to the podium and rightfully indicts me for my white privilege. And, like, he's not wrong. You know what I mean? But what's interesting is that because I am coming there, like, expressly to invite that type of conversation, he and I have actually gotten pretty close.
Okay.
And I've learned a lot from him. I'm not going to be able to access experiences beyond my ability to organically have them myself. What I mean is, if someone's not going to share with me their experience, their understanding of the world, the way the world treats them, I'm never going to understand it.
Yeah.
But, he comes up ready to fucking throw down, right? And understandably upset by a lot of kind of the incendiary, inflammatory comments I've been making. But as soon as he sees that I'm willing to listen to him and that I'm being kind of deliberately outrageous, it's remarkable the way in which he was disarmed. And the conversation that has evolved from that initial meeting has been really crucial to me, because I need those inputs.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get out of your own bubble, and
Sure.
technologies these days imprison you within it. They don't allow me to get beyond that. I mean, if you went through my TikTok algorithm right now, I would be exposed.
Yeah.
You know, like you can't escape from what your genuine interest is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do.
It's like you can tell McDonald's to put the salad on the menu. Ain't nobody fucking eating that salad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do.
It like so I think what has been great about kind of being a little bit more antagonistic with my social media,
Sure.
but then open to the response, is that I've actually kind of generated a cool network of people that came to, you know, the Sheriff of Lark Street branding very upset. But then in so doing started a conversation from which I've learned, and they kind of get it and then start adopting their own public branding that
Sure.
plays into that kind of, you know, to your point, the WWF style of communication.
Yeah, it's like, how can I create some sort of persona that works well with what the sheriff has already
That's right.
laid down? You know
That's
what
exactly
I mean?
right.
You know, get with it.
That's right.
You know, become a tag team partner.
And honestly, I mean, I'm using that. You know, what began as a genuine, you know, it was genuinely inspired by my need to advocate for solutions to what was wrong on Lark Street or in the city of Albany generally.
Yeah.
I truly believe that as goes the city, so goes the county. My hometown of New Scotland is going to get dragged down if the city of Albany falls.
Yeah.
And it's rough right now.
Yeah.
The desire to make it better is what inspired me to kind of adopt this persona.
Yeah.
And I'm now kind of using the same tactics to actually, you know, run for office.
Right.
I'm running a party unaffiliated bid for the presidency of the Albany Common Council. That's the city council.
Mm-hmm.
And what's notable about it is because of social media, the victory isn't the point.
Yeah.
It's the conversation. It's the getting the message out. It's the speaking with people.
Right.
That's the point.
Yeah.
You know, I think the world has changed a lot. It used to be that our leadership ascended to a position of formal institutional power. Then you had a media ecosystem that reported on that. And then, you know, the people received that messaging.
Yeah.
Right? We can all talk to God ourselves now.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say, we all have in our pockets immediate access to any message we want.
Right.
You can bypass that entirely. So all of a sudden, it becomes a little bit less important to occupy a specific office than to be able to command a certain amount of attention.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so that's how I look at it. You know, I do want to get, you know, my perspective on some things out in the city of Albany, and the social media platform I've created for my business, I'm kind of just converting for that effort.
So you were saying that your tasting room is on Lark Street.
Yep.
That's the only component of the business that's on Lark Street?
Yeah, and you know, that's a stage itself, right? Lark Street
That's the wrestling ring.
That's the wrestling ring. That's exactly right. I mean, the rest of the business exists in, right now, 32 counties in New York, in liquor stores, bars, restaurants, and I also, I mean, you get to watch the process of us building a company, because I'm taking that phone camera with me whenever I go someplace. So we get into a new location, I'm talking about it. If something happens to me in my personal life, it might drive me to the bottle. And so, you know, I talk about that too. You make the product personal, and you make the personal a personality.
Yeah.
Lark Street is just, it happens to be where I actually live. VA loan, bought a brownstone. I always wanted to live on Lark Street. So that's where I physically I'm located myself. And then 4 blocks from me is my tasting room. And, you know, I think that, like, for me, for what I deem to be my universe, Lark Street's the center of it. And that's why I want to be there. But you've identified it. It's the stage. The tasting room, you know, that's 10% of the entire operation.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So, if you could have a shot of liquor with anyone, famous, non-famous, anyone in the world, what kind of shot would it be, and who would the person be?
I mean, it would obviously be my whiskey,
Sure.
right?
Whiskey is your liquor of choice, would you say?
At this point,
Yeah.
I've developed a taste for it. I
Okay.
mean, before alcohol used to be a thing I did as a thing that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
It was the objective was the effect.
Sure.
Now I've actually, I've developed a palate for it, and so my aged wheat whiskey is unbeatable, but my rye whiskey is probably my favorite.
Okay.
And so that's what it would be. The harder question is who would I want to enjoy that shot with?
Yeah.
And as much as I want to say that it would be some sort of influential figure from history, a battlefield commander,
Yep.
a philosopher, a writer, it would probably be, most realistically, like a beautiful woman with a gargantuan derriere.
Okay.
Probably Kardashian maybe. There was a woman named Buffy Caruth. She went by Buffy the Body back in the day. I think those moments, let's be real.
Yeah.
I'm not going to eat the McDonald's salad.
Yeah.
I want to tell you that I'm going to have this really intellectual conversation with someone who could make me a better human being. But if you're telling me that I have my pick of any single human being that I can spend half an hour with,
Sure.
I got to shoot my shot.
I don't disagree. You caught me off guard with going from historical figures right to the word derriere.
Yeah, dude.
You know?
I mean, let's be real.
So
let's cut through the clutter.
Sure.
I don't need someone to grandstand and tell me that they're they want to sit and talk to Isaac Newton about how it was that 24 he was able to fundamentally reinvent our understanding of the universe with derivative calculus. I don't care. Okay. Congratulations, thank you.
Sure.
But
Get it.
It's life is short, and there's a lot of really beautiful people out there that I would like to meet.
So if you were a wrestler in the WWE, I'm assuming you would pick someone like Kim Kardashian. She would be your corner manager. Remember they used to have their wives and stuff around?
I think that is a great environment for this. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It also would have to be someone who gets it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. There's a certain element now, especially of the way, whether it's OnlyFans or all these different platforms, there's an entrepreneurship to the way some women have utilized their aesthetics and kind of their charisma to create businesses.
Yeah.
A great example was I was sucked in by the Call Her Daddy podcast back in the day when it was the original Alex and Sophia. I thought that expression of two people was fucking fascinating.
It was.
And I think that I learn a lot more about humanity from really dialing into conversations by women, because perhaps the most inaccessible type of human experience that I can think of is that of a woman.
Yeah.
It's fun. It is fundamentally different than the way the world speaks to me. I have 3 sisters. Very different world. My human experience is littered with a privilege that I'm oblivious to until I listen to what it is that they have experienced, and that's how I learn. That's how you evolve beyond just kind of turning into being entitled to the world around you. If you're going to end up being a worthwhile human being, if you're going to end up improving anything, you've got to take a perspective from people who are engaged differently by their environment.
Yeah.
So I would defer, generally speaking, to the intellect of a woman who's experienced something very different than I have in her however many years she's been on the planet.
Yeah.
Who's also really exciting to look at. Those are my favorites.
It's a good combination.
Yeah, dude.
So part of my own growth and development just as a person as an aspiring business owner, I like to try to borrow characteristics from other successful people. So if you could loan out your best quality so that I could try to implement it into what I'm doing, what would you say that would be?
That's a great question. It's a great question.
Let's go back to it. I'll ask you something else real quick. You a beer drinker?
Bet. That's an even better question. I got an easy answer for that.
Okay.
Player, like I wasn't a beer drinker because now I'm 42, so you better believe like I'm watching a gut develop on me. Yeah. And like one of the reasons that I'm I like liquor is that stuff is just not nearly as filling as beer. Yeah. But borrowing from some really exciting Albany legacy, I'm about to put out a beer called Hedrick.
Okay.
I got the trademark to what was the beer owned by Dan O'Connell, the notorious, almost lifelong Albany machine Democratic boss.
Okay.
Jack McEnany, who was an assembly member in the 109th, he served that position for quite a while. I was talking to him recently, and he was pointing out, he's like, yeah, Dan O'Connell and his boys, they were really helpful. They made sure that you had a new keg every week, whether you needed it or not. And that was the thing. If you wanted to get your on-premises permit to serve alcohol anywhere in the county, you had to buy Dan O'Connell's Hedrick beer. Yeah. And Hedrick beer went the way of the dodo at some point, but like all science at this point, trying to revive a mammoth, we have brought it back. And so I am going to be pushing this notorious beer that it means a lot to the Albany historical buffs.
Yeah.
And I just think, if you don't know Albany history, you're missing out on like a critical component of America.
Yeah.
Ben Franklin wrote the Albany Plan of Union. I want to say it's 1754. Okay, I'm pretty sure it's the Albany Plan of Union, 1754.
I'm not going to be able to correct you. I'm not a history buff, but
Wikipedia it. I mean, until someone messes it up.
ChatGPT it.
ChatGPT it.
Yeah.
And that was the original call for the colonies to unite. That happened down at Albany.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
And that history is very colorful. We've got one of the country's, in fact, we have the country's longest serving municipal executive in Mayor Erastus Corning. 43 years. Might be 41 years. Either way, that dude was like, half a century in office.
Sure.
And Dan O'Connell was the guy that put him there.
Yeah.
And he had a beer, and he made sure everyone in Albany drank it, and we're bringing it back.
Sounds like Dan O'Connell is the person you would want to have your shot of whiskey with.
That's interesting.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you just spoke pretty highly of him, so
I'll put it this way: he's definitely someone who I'd want to study how he worked.
Yeah.
He might not be the best conversation.
Might not learn that over a shot. You might have to have a big glass.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Bottomless whiskey. So.
But you asked like, what skill would I loan out to assist you?
Yeah.
And I think the easiest answer is probably writing.
Okay.
I'm a good writer.
Okay.
It's probably my only talent. Anything that you see in like my capacity to speak all comes from the ability to organize thoughts on paper, redo it, and create what we were talking about earlier, which was, how do you convey ideas to people?
Sure.
In as quickly, efficiently, but colorfully as possible.
Yeah.
My understanding of satire is first looking at a first draft, and then start tweaking and making it a little bit more creative. I think writing is a lost art. Writing is increasingly outsourced to the machines, but for me, what the machines do in ChatGPT is they put out a good product. I think the exercise of writing is what focuses the mind.
Okay.
And that's probably, it's not just the skill I would most immediately outsource to you. It's realistically, it's probably the only skill I actually have.
Okay. I think you're selling yourself short there with the only
skill.
It's
all the other skills come from
Okay.
being able to sit down and figure out like, what do I want to say? Who am I? And how am I expressing that?
Right.
I think one of the interesting things about where we are is increasingly, man, like as new technologies enable us to express ourselves in more depth,
Yeah.
remember that you're also expressing the talent of the machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can make a cool song. You can get out of your brain music that would have been stuck there because you don't have the actual understanding of the instruments to be able to bring it out. But I also think that when you start really refining those skills and you're able to create something with your own fingers, not filtered through the enhancement of some sort of technological device, you know, that right there, that's you.
Yeah.
That's the organic matter. You know, and having something that you can do, that you're proud of, that doesn't require technological inputs is, I think, really important. I will never be able to paint a picture of which I'm proud, but I have started, you know, understanding when I look at a painting that it's like, oh shit, that came from someone, like from their mental image,
Yeah.
through their fingers, onto parchment, canvas, paper, with nothing more than a brush.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool.
It is very impressive. So, also impressive, the New Scotland Spirits, Sheriff of Lark Street. If you are a fan of local liquor, or you are a beautiful woman with a large derriere,
Well said.
meet the Sheriff on Lark Street, the tasting room. I'm excited to see the formation of the Hedrick, and thank you for stopping.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
It was great.
Really appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Yep.